Marcus Johnson checked his watch as he drove home from the community center. It was nearly midnight. The charity fundraiser had gone well, raising over $15,000 for the youth mentorship program. As the board president, Marcus had stayed late to help clean up and count the donations. Now he was tired but satisfied as he drove his black sedan through the quiet streets of Oakwood. The red and blue lights flashed in his rearview mirror without warning. Marcus frowned, checking his speedometer. He had been driving exactly at the speed limit. He signaled and pulled over to the curb, then placed both hands on the steering wheel where they would be visible. Two police officers approached his car, one on each side. The taller one, a white man with a crew cut, shined a flashlight directly into Marcus's face. "License and registration," the officer said. His name tag read, Miller. "Good evening, officer," Marcus said calmly. "May I ask why I'm being pulled?" "Over." Officer Miller didn't answer. "License and registration, now." Marcus nodded. "I'm going to reach for my wallet in my inside jacket pocket, okay?" The officer on the passenger side, whose name tag read Bennett, put his hand on his holster. "Just do it slowly." Marcus carefully removed his wallet and handed his license to Officer Miller. Then he reached for the glove compartment. "I'm getting my registration now." As Marcus opened the glove compartment, Officer Bennett suddenly yanked the passenger door open. "What are you hiding in there?" Bennett demanded. "Nothing, sir, just getting my registration as requested." Marcus handed the registration to Officer Miller, who studied it with his flashlight. Marcus was a tall man with broad shoulders, his hair starting to gray at the temples. At 45, he had the dignified look of someone who commanded respect in his daily life. He wore a tailored navy suit from the fundraiser, with a light blue tie now loosened at his neck. "Step out of the vehicle." "Mr. Johnson," Officer Miller ordered. "May I ask why?" "I haven't violated any traffic laws. We've had reports of drug trafficking in this area. Your vehicle matches a description." Marcus raised an eyebrow. His car was a 3-year-old Honda Accord, possibly the most common car on the road. Still, he remained polite. "Officers, I'm coming home from a charity event at the Oakwood Community Center. I'm the board president there. You can call and verify if you'd like." "Step out of the car now," Officer Bennett repeated more forcefully. Marcus slowly got out, standing tall next to his vehicle. "I work for the government," he said quietly. "I would appreciate some professional courtesy here." Officer Miller smirked. "Yeah? Sanitation department?" "No, federal." "Save it." Miller cut him off. "We've heard every excuse. Mind if we search your vehicle?" "Actually, I do mind. I don't consent to a search. Do you have probable cause?" The officers exchanged glances. "I smell marijuana, Officer," Bennett declared suddenly. Marcus shook his head. "No, you don't. I don't use drugs, and there are none in my vehicle." "Are you calling me a liar?" Bennett stepped closer to Marcus, invading his personal space. "I'm simply stating a fact. There are no drugs in my car or on my person." Officer Miller moved behind Marcus. "Put your hands behind your back." "Am I under arrest on what charge?" "Resisting an officer and suspicious behavior." "Now put your hands behind your back before we have a problem." Marcus took a deep breath. He had been here before, not personally, but he had heard this story too many times. As a black man in America, he had been careful his entire life. Always polite to officers, always respectful, always aware that situations could escalate quickly. I'm not resisting," Marcus said clearly, placing his hands behind his back. "I am complying under protest and wish to speak with an attorney." Officer Miller roughly cuffed him, tightening the metal bracelets until they bit into Marcus's wrists. Meanwhile, Officer Bennett began searching the car without permission, pulling things from the glove compartment and tossing them onto the seat. "You won't find anything because there's nothing to find," Marcus said. "This is an illegal search." "Keep talking and we'll add more charges," Officer Miller warned. Marcus fell silent, watching as they searched his vehicle. He memorized every detail of their behavior, noting the time on his watch and the badge numbers of both officers. He noticed that neither officer had activated their body cameras, a clear violation of department policy. After finding nothing in the car, the officers looked even more annoyed. Officer Miller grabbed Marcus by the arm and led him to the patrol car. "You're taking me in?" "For what?" Marcus asked. "Resisting arrest, suspicious behavior, and now we're adding interfering with police business." Marcus shook his head as they placed him in the back of the patrol car. "My attorney will be very interested in this," he said quietly. The ride to the police station was silent. Marcus watched the streets pass by, mentally preparing for what would come next. This wasn't how he'd planned to spend his night, but in a strange way it might help with his work. He just needed to stay calm and observe. At the station, the officers led Marcus to processing. The desk sergeant, an older white man with a gray mustache, barely looked up as they brought Marcus in. "What have we got here?" the sergeant asked. "Resisting arrest, suspicious behavior during a traffic stop, possible drug possession," Officer Miller reported. "We didn't find any drugs," Officer Bennett added quickly. "But we will once we do a more thorough search," Miller said with a meaningful look. The sergeant nodded and began the booking process. They took Marcus's fingerprints and mugshot, then emptied his pockets into a plastic bin. His cell phone, keys, wallet, and a small notebook were placed inside. The officers missed the second phone hidden in a secret pocket of his jacket, the one that had been recording since the moment he was pulled over. "One phone call," Marcus requested. The sergeant pushed the phone toward him. Marcus dialed a number from memory. "Diane? It's Marcus. I've been arrested on false charges by Oakwood PD. Officers Miller and Bennett." He paused, listening. "No, I'm fine, but I'll need you to come down first thing in the morning." Another pause. "Yes, exactly as we discussed might happen." It's finally happening. After hanging up, Marcus was led to a holding cell where 3 other men were already waiting. One was passed out on the bench, another paced nervously, and the third watched Marcus with curious eyes. "What they get you for, man?" the watching man asked. Marcus sat down on the empty bench. "Driving while black." The man nodded knowingly. "Same story, different day. Me, I was walking home from my night shift. Apparently that's suspicious in my own neighborhood." Marcus extended his hand. "Marcus Johnson. Pete Williams." They shook hands. "You don't seem too worried." "Let's just say I have some resources," Marcus said. "And this isn't my first encounter with law enforcement bias." "You a lawyer or something?" Marcus smiled slightly. "Or something." As the night wore on, Marcus closed his eyes but didn't sleep. He reviewed the events of the traffic stop in his mind, carefully memorizing every detail, every word spoken, every procedural violation. By morning, he had a mental list of at least 12 policy infractions and civil rights violations. When the morning shift came on duty, a female officer approached the cell. "Johnson, your attorney is here." Marcus stood up and nodded goodbye to Pete. As he walked out of the holding area, he saw Diane Powell waiting for him. She was a tall black woman in her 50s, dressed in an impeccable gray suit, her braided hair pulled back in a professional style. Her expression was a mixture of concern and determination. "You okay?" she asked quietly. "I'm fine. But they're not going to be when we're done," Marcus replied. "We need to file today." Diane nodded. "The paperwork is ready. As soon as we get you processed out of here." An hour later, Marcus walked out of the police station into the bright morning sunlight. He straightened his wrinkled suit and took a deep breath of fresh air. "So," Diane said, "do we proceed as planned?" Marcus nodded, his expression serious. "Exactly as planned. It's time to see this through." As they walked to Diane's car, Marcus felt a strange sense of purpose. What had happened to him last night was unjust but not unexpected. It was, in fact, exactly what he had been waiting for. The real work was just beginning. Marcus sat across from Diane at her law office later that morning. The space was modest but professional, with law books lining the walls and a large window overlooking the downtown area. He had changed into fresh clothes that Diane had brought. For him, a simple button-up shirt and slacks. "They made 12 procedural violations that I counted," Marcus said, sipping the hot coffee Diane's assistant had provided. No probable cause for the stop. No Miranda rights. Illegal search of my vehicle. Excessive force during arrest. False charges. And their body cameras were conveniently turned off. Diane nodded, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. And you recorded everything? Marcus pulled the second phone from his jacket pocket. From the moment they put on their lights, the recording is already backed up to our secure server. Good. We'll file the complaint today, but you know how this will go. Diane looked up from her notes. Internal affairs will protect their own. Captain Hayes has a history of closing ranks. That's exactly what we're counting on, Marcus replied. This isn't just about my case, it's about the pattern. Diane leaned back in her chair. You've been building this case for 6 months, Marcus. Are you sure you want to be the test subject? There are risks. Who better? Marcus placed his coffee mug down. I have the resources, the knowledge, and frankly the position to withstand whatever they throw at me. Most people in our community don't. The phone on Diane's desk rang. She answered it, listened for a moment, then covered the mouthpiece. It's Gloria, she whispered. Marcus took the phone. Hey, honey. Are you okay? Gloria's voice was tight with concern. You didn't call last night. I'm fine. Just had a long night at the station. They actually arrested you? Was that part of the plan? Not exactly, but it works in our favor. I'll tell you everything tonight. After saying goodbye to his wife, Marcus handed the phone back to Diane. She worries. She has good reason to, Diane replied. Now let's file this complaint and see how quickly they dismiss it. 3 days later, Marcus received the expected letter from the Oakwood Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. The investigation had found no evidence of misconduct by Officers Miller or Bennett. The letter stated that the officers had reasonable suspicion to initiate the traffic stop, and that any force used was within departmental guidelines. Marcus brought the letter to Diane's office where she was meeting with her paralegal, Sam Wilson, a young man fresh out of law school. Right on schedule, Marcus said, handing her the letter. Diane scanned it quickly. Predictable. They didn't even interview you, did they? Not once. Just took the officer's word for everything. Sam looked confused. So what now? If Internal Affairs won't do anything, now we file a civil rights lawsuit, Diane explained, and hope we get the right judge. Or the wrong one, Marcus added with a knowing look. Diane understood his meaning. Yes, sometimes the wrong judge can be exactly what we need. 2 weeks later, Marcus, Diane, and Sam sat in courtroom 305 of the Oakwood County Courthouse. The aisle room was mostly empty except for a few reporters and curious onlookers. Officers Miller and Bennett sat at the defense table with their attorney, Linda Graham, a sharp-featured woman in an expensive suit. The bailiff stood. All rise for the Honorable Judge Harold Winters. An older white man with silver hair and cold, blue eyes entered from his chambers. Judge Winters had been on the bench for over 20 years and had a reputation for being tough on defendants and easy on police. He was exactly who Marcus and Diane had hoped would be assigned to the case. Be seated, Judge Winters said, adjusting his glasses as he reviewed the file before him. Case number 2025 CV 4872, Johnson v. Oakwood Police Department, officers, Frank Miller and Steve Bennett. He looked up, his gaze settling on Marcus with obvious skepticism. Another complaint against our police officers, I see. Diane stood. Your Honor, this is a civil rights case involving clear violations of my client's 4th and 14th Amendment rights. Linda Graham rose from the defense table. Your Honor, this is a frivolous lawsuit by an individual who resisted lawful police commands during a legitimate traffic stop. Judge Winters nodded toward Graham. I tend to agree, Counselor. Our officers have a difficult job. I'm inclined to dismiss this case immediately, but I'll hear brief statements from both sides. Diane kept her expression neutral, though Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders. This was exactly the bias they had expected from Judge Winters. Your Honor, Diane began, my client was pulled over without cause, searched without consent or probable cause, and arrested on fabricated charges that were later dropped. We have evidence. Evidence? Judge Winters interrupted. Ms. Powell, I've reviewed the police report. Your client was uncooperative and gave officers reason to believe he might be involved in criminal activity. That's simply not true, Your Honor, Diane replied. Mr. Johnson was fully cooperative. He only asserted his constitutional rights, which is not the same as being uncooperative. Linda Graham spoke up. Your Honor, the officers noted that Mr. Johnson was evasive when questioned and claimed to work for the government, which they had no way to verify at that time. Marcus watched the exchange carefully. Every word was being recorded, every biased statement from the judge noted for later use. We request discovery of the officer's body camera footage, Diane said. Linda Graham shook her head. Unfortunately, there was a technical malfunction with the body cameras that night. How convenient, Diane responded. Judge Winters frowned. Watch your tone, counselor. Technical problems happen. They seem to happen quite frequently with these officers, Diane replied. In fact, we've identified 17 similar incidents in the past year where these same officers had body camera malfunctions during traffic stops involving minority drivers. This caught the judge's attention. That's a serious accusation, Ms. Powell. It's not an accusation, Your Honor. It's a documented fact. We request access to the department's records regarding body camera malfunctions over the past 3 years. Linda Graham stood quickly. Objection. That's an overly broad fishing expedition that has nothing to do with this specific incident. Judge Winters nodded. Objection sustained. Ms. Powell, please confine your request to evidence directly related to your client's specific encounter. Marcus leaned forward and whispered something to Diane, who nodded slightly. Your Honor, Diane said, in that case, we request all radio communications between Officers Miller, Bennett, and dispatch on the night in question. We believe these will show that my client's vehicle was specifically targeted, not randomly stopped. Linda Graham objected again. Those communications are part of ongoing police operations and could compromise other investigations. Judge Winters didn't hesitate. Objection sustained. Marcus watched as the pattern of bias unfolded exactly as they had predicted. For every request Diane made, Judge Winters found a reason to deny it. For every objection from the defense, he found a reason to sustain it. After an hour of legal arguments, Judge Winters made his position clear. I'm setting a high bar for this case to proceed, Ms. Powell. I want to see substantial evidence of wrongdoing, not just your client's word against 2 respected officers. As the hearing concluded, Captain Richard Hayes of the Oakwood Police Department entered the courtroom and sat in the back row. He made eye contact with Marcus and smiled, smugly. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered around Marcus and Diane. Mr. Johnson, do you think you can get a fair trial with Judge Winters? One reporter asked. Marcus looked directly into the camera. Everyone deserves equal treatment under the law. That's all we're asking for. Diane added, we're just getting started. The truth will come out. As they walked to Diane's car, Marcus spoke quietly. The judge is even more biased than we expected. Perfect, Diane replied with a slight smile. The more obvious his bias, the stronger our case becomes. How? Long before we move to the next phase? Marcus asked. Let's give them enough rope, Diane said, unlocking her car. The next hearing is in 2 weeks. That should be enough time for them to get comfortable. Marcus nodded, looking back at the courthouse where Captain Hayes was watching them from. The steps. They think they've already won. They always do, Diane replied. That's their weakness. 2 weeks passed quickly. The case of Johnson versus the Oakwood Police Department had gained attention in local media. The morning newspaper featured a story about Marcus Johnson, describing him as a community leader fighting an uphill battle against a system that protected its own. The evening news had interviewed several young black men from the community who shared similar stories of being stopped by Officers Miller and Bennett. Marcus sat at his kitchen table, reading the newspaper while drinking his morning coffee. Gloria placed a plate of eggs and toast in front of him. You've stirred up the hornet's nest, she said, sitting across from him with her own breakfast. Captain Hayes gave an interview calling you an attention seeker with a grudge against police. Marcus smiled. Good. The more they talk, the more they reveal. Gloria reached across the table and took his hand. I'm proud of what you're doing, but I worry. These people have power. They could make our lives difficult. They already make life difficult for too many people in our community, Marcus replied. Someone has to stand up to them. Just promise me you know what you're doing. Marcus squeezed her hand. I do. Trust me. Later that morning, Marcus met Diane at her office. Sam was there too, surrounded by stacks of files. We've been busy, Diane said. Sam discovered something interesting in the public records. Sam pushed, his glasses up on his nose. Officers Miller and Bennett have been named in 27 complaints over the past 3 years. All filed by people of color, all dismissed by Internal Affairs. And Judge Winters, Marcus asked, has heard 8 cases involving accusations against Oakwood PD, Diane said. He ruled in favor of the police every single time. Marcus nodded. Exactly what we expected. What about the radio communications we requested? Denied, of course, Diane replied. But we have our own recording that proves you were targeted. We're saving that for the right moment. And the secret weapon? Marcus asked quietly. Diane glanced at Sam, then back to Marcus. Everything's ready, just waiting for your signal. That afternoon, they returned to courtroom 305. This time, the room was packed. Word had spread about the case, and community members had come to show support. Marcus noticed several familiar faces from the charity event he had attended the night of his arrest. Officers Miller and Bennett sat at the defense table, looking confident. Captain Hayes sat directly behind them. Linda Graham shuffled papers, occasionally whispering to her clients. Judge Winters entered, looking annoyed at the crowded courtroom. I see we have quite an audience today, he said. Let me remind everyone that this is a court of law, not a public forum. Any disruptions will result in immediate removal. He turned his attention to the case. Ms. Powell, I understand you have some witnesses you wish to call? Diane stood. Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls Pete Williams. Pete, the man who had shared the holding cell with Marcus on the night of his arrest, walked to the witness stand. After being sworn in, he described what he had seen. Mr. Johnson was calm the whole time, not angry, not causing trouble. The officers who brought him in were laughing about it. One of them, the tall one, Miller, said something like another one who thinks he's special. Linda Graham stood for cross-examination. Mr. Williams, you were arrested that night for public intoxication, correct? I was walking home from work. They said I was drunk. I wasn't. So you claim. But why should we trust the memory of someone who was arrested for being intoxicated? Pete's face hardened. Because I was as sober as I am right now. I don't drink, never have. Yet the officers reported you were stumbling and slurring your words. They lied then, just like they're lying now. Judge Winters frowned. Watch your tone, Mr. Williams. Officer statements are considered reliable testimony in this court. Diane called 2 more witnesses who had filed complaints against officers Miller and Bennett in the past. Each told similar stories of being stopped, without cause, searched without consent, and treated roughly. Judge Winters appeared increasingly impatient, frequently interrupting their testimony with questions that seemed designed to discredit them. Finally, Diane called Marcus to the stand. Mr. Johnson, she began, please tell the court what happened on the night of May 12th. Marcus described the traffic stop exactly as it had happened, his voice calm and measured. When he mentioned telling the officers he worked for the government, Linda Graham leaned forward with interest. And how did the officers respond when you told them you worked for the government? Diane asked. Officer Miller made a dismissive comment, suggesting I worked for sanitation. When I tried to clarify, Officer Bennett cut me off. Why do you think they didn't believe you? Before Marcus could answer, Linda Graham objected. Calls for speculation. Sustained, Judge Winters said immediately. Diane tried a different approach. Mr. Johnson, in your complaint, you stated that the officers targeted you specifically. What makes you believe that? Their initial claim was that my vehicle matched a description related to drug trafficking. My car is a black Honda Accord, one of the most common vehicles on the road. Later, when no drugs were found, they changed their story to say I was driving erratically, which is false. Linda Graham stood for cross-examination, her expression smug. Mr. Johnson, you claim to work for the government. What exactly is your job? I work for the federal government. Doing what, specifically? Marcus glanced at Diane, who gave a slight nod. I conduct investigations. Graham raised an eyebrow. Investigations? So you're claiming to be some kind of federal agent? Do you expect us to believe that? I'm simply stating a fact. If you were truly a federal agent, why didn't you identify yourself properly to the officers? I attempted to, but was cut off. And even if I hadn't identified myself, that wouldn't justify their actions. Every citizen deserves to be treated with respect and dignity, regardless of their occupation. Graham paced in front of the witness stand. Mr. Johnson, isn't it true that you've been planning this lawsuit for months? That you're using this alleged incident to push a political agenda against our police department? Objection, Diane called. Out. Counsel is making accusations without foundation. Judge Winters waved his hand dismissively. Overruled, the witness will answer. Marcus looked directly at Graham. I believe in justice and accountability. If that's a political agenda, then yes, I support it. Graham's voice hardened. Isn't it true that you've been working with community activists to target these specific officers? That this is all part of a coordinated campaign to undermine public trust in law enforcement? Objection. Diane stood. Counsel is badgering the witness and making unfounded accusations. Overruled, Judge Winters said. I'd like to hear the answer. Marcus remained calm. I work with many community organizations to improve relationships between police and citizens. That's not targeting, that's building bridges. After Marcus stepped down, Linda Graham called Officer Miller to the stand. He presented himself well, clean-cut, professional, and soft-spoken. Officer Miller, Graham, began, Can you tell us why you stopped Mr. Johnson's vehicle that night? We received information about a vehicle matching that description being involved in drug trafficking. When we approached, Mr. Johnson seemed nervous and evasive. And did he identify himself as a federal agent? No, ma'am. He made a vague comment about working for the government, which many people claim when they're stopped. Without proper identification, we had no way to verify his claim. What happened next? When we asked to search his vehicle, he became confrontational. For our safety, we had to secure him while conducting the search. Diane stood for cross-examination. Officer Miller, your body camera was turned off during this encounter. Why? Miller shifted slightly. There was a technical malfunction. It happens sometimes. Interesting that these malfunctions seem to happen frequently during stops involving people of color. Objection, Graham called. Counsel is making inflammatory statements, not asking questions. Sustained, Judge Winters said quickly. Ms. Powell, stick to questions. Diane changed tactics. Officer Miller, you claimed you received information about a vehicle matching Mr. Johnson's. Can you provide details about this information? Who provided it? What exactly was the description? Miller hesitated. That's confidential information related to an ongoing investigation. Judge Winters nodded. The officer doesn't have to reveal sensitive information about police operations. Diane pressed on. Officer Miller, isn't it true that you and Officer Bennett have been the subject of multiple civilian complaints for similar conduct? Objection, Graham called. Irrelevant and prejudicial. Sustained, Judge Winters ruled. As the hearing continued, the pattern became clear. Every attempt Diane made to expose contradictions or establish a pattern was blocked by Judge Winters. Every statement from the officers was accepted without question. When the day ended, Judge Winters looked down from the bench. I've heard enough. We'll continue tomorrow with final arguments, but I must say, Mr. Johnson, your case seems to be built on very shaky ground. Outside the courtroom, reporters gathered around Marcus and Diane. How do you feel about today's proceedings? A reporter asked. Marcus looked directly into the camera. The truth will come out. Sometimes the system needs to show its true colors before real change can happen, Diane added. We're just getting started. As they walked away. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the courthouse earlier than usual. He wore a crisp charcoal suit with a dark blue tie. Gloria had kissed him at the door, her eyes showing both worry and pride. "Today's the day," she had whispered. Marcus had simply nodded. Now he sat with Diane in a small conference room near the courtroom, reviewing their strategy one last time. Sam rushed in, slightly out of breath. "They're all here," he reported. Captain Hayes brought the police chief and even the mayor. "The courtroom is packed." Diane looked at Marcus. "Are you ready for this? Once we do this, there's no going back." Marcus straightened his tie. "I've been ready for 6 months. Let's finish what we started." They entered courtroom 305 together. As Sam had said, the room was filled to capacity. Marcus noticed several high-ranking police officials sitting behind officers Miller and Bennett. The mayor, a tall woman in a red blazer, whispered to an aide. Local reporters filled the back row, notebooks ready. Judge Winters entered, his expression stern. "Let's get straight to final arguments. Ms. Graham, you may begin." Linda Graham stood, smoothing her suit jacket. "Your Honor, this case is a clear example of a citizen with a grudge against police trying to turn a routine traffic stop into a civil rights issue. Officers Miller and Bennett were simply doing their jobs, following standard procedure based on reliable information." She paced before the bench. "Mr. Johnson claims he was targeted but offers no proof. He claims excessive force was used, but shows no evidence of injury. He claims he identified himself as a government employee, but the officers have no recollection of this." Graham gestured toward Marcus. "What we have here is an angry citizen who didn't like being questioned by police, who is now using this court to push a political agenda against our hardworking officers. The defense asks that this frivolous case be dismissed with prejudice." Judge E. Winters nodded approvingly. "Thank you, Ms. Graham. Ms. Powell, your argument?" Diane stood, her posture perfect. "Your Honor, this case is about more than one traffic stop. It's about a pattern of behavior by these officers and a system that protects them rather than the citizens they're sworn to serve." She walked toward the officers. "We've tried to introduce evidence of similar complaints against officers Miller and Bennett. We've tried to obtain their radio communications from that night. We've tried to question their changing story about why they stopped. Mr. Johnson, at every turn we've been blocked." Judge Winters frowned. "Ms. Powell, this court has followed proper procedure. If you're suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything, Your Honor. I'm stating facts. But there's one fact we haven't yet introduced into evidence." Diane turned toward Marcus. "With your permission, we'd like to do so now." Judge Winters sighed. "What new evidence could possibly be relevant at this stage?" "Your Honor," Diane said, "I call Marcus Johnson back to the stand for redirect examination." Marcus stood and walked to the witness stand. After being sworn in again, he sat calmly, his hands folded in his lap. Diane approached. "Mr. Johnson, yesterday you testified that you work for the federal government conducting investigations. Could you please elaborate on exactly what your position is?" Before Marcus could answer, Linda Graham was on her feet. "Objection. This was covered in cross-examination yesterday. Counsel is simply trying to give her client another chance to make unsubstantiated claims." Judge Winters nodded. "Sustained. Ms. Powell, move on." "Your Honor," Diane persisted, "this goes directly to the credibility of the officer's testimony. They claimed Mr. Johnson never properly identified himself. He had his chance to address that yesterday," Judge Winters said firmly. "Move on." Diane looked at Marcus, who gave her a slight nod. "In that case, Your Honor, I have a different question. Mr. Johnson, Officer Miller testified yesterday that you seemed nervous and evasive during the traffic stop. How would you characterize your own demeanor?" "I was professional and calm," Marcus replied. "In fact, I was specifically trained to remain calm in high-stress situations as part of my job." "Trained by whom?" Diane asked. "By the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Linda Graham stood again. "Objection. The witness is again making unsubstantiated claims about being in law enforcement." Judge Winters leaned forward, looking annoyed. "Mr. Johnson, are you now claiming to be a law enforcement officer? Because if you are, I would expect you to have mentioned this critical fact earlier. I attempted to mention it several times, Your Honor, Marcus said calmly. Both to the officers that night and in this courtroom yesterday, but I was cut off each time. This is absurd, Linda Graham interjected. If Mr. Johnson were actually a federal agent, he would have proper identification. I do have proper identification, Marcus replied. The courtroom fell silent. Judge Winters stared at Marcus. If you have federal credentials, why haven't you presented them before now? Diane spoke up. Because, Your Honor, that would have compromised an ongoing federal investigation. But given how this case has proceeded, my client is now authorized to reveal his identity. Judge Winters looked stunned. What federal investigation? What are you talking about? Marcus reached into his suit jacket and removed a leather wallet. He opened it to reveal a badge and identification card. My name is Marcus Johnson. I am a senior special investigator with the Civil Rights Division of the United States Department of Justice. The courtroom erupted. Captain Hayes stood up, his face red. The mayor's aide whispered urgently in her ear. Officers Miller and Bennett exchanged worried glances. Judge Winters banged his gavel repeatedly. Order! Order in the court! When the room finally quieted, he glared at Marcus. Mr. Johnson, are you telling this court that you deliberately concealed your identity as part of some kind of undercover operation? Yes, Your Honor, Marcus replied. For the past 6 months, I have been leading a federal investigation into patterns of civil rights violations within the Oakwood Police Department. My traffic stop and arrest by officers Miller and Bennett was not random. Their dispatch records, which we have obtained through federal channels, show that they were specifically instructed to find a reason to stop my vehicle that night. Linda Graham looked pale. Your Honor, this is completely irregular. The defense requests a recess to confer with our clients. Denied, Judge Winters said, his voice notably less confident. I want to hear what Mr. Johnson has to say. Marcus continued. Our investigation has documented 43 similar incidents involving these officers over the past 3 years. All targeted at drivers of color, all involving questionable stops, searches without probable cause, and in many cases, excessive force. He turned to look directly at Captain Hayes. The pattern extends beyond these 2 officers to departmental policies and leadership that encourage and protect such behavior. The mayor stood up. As the chief executive of this city, I demand to know why the Department of Justice didn't inform my office of this investigation. Marcus looked at her calmly. Because, Madam Mayor, part of our investigation includes looking into how city leadership has ignored previous complaints and protected officers with known records of misconduct. The courtroom was absolutely silent now. Judge Winters seemed to be struggling to regain control of the situation. Mr. Johnson, Agent Johnson, I'm not sure how to proceed here. Marcus turned back to the judge. Your Honor, at this moment, federal agents are serving subpoenas for all Oakwood Police Department records related to traffic stops, arrests, and civilian complaints for the past 5 years. They are also securing the officers' personal and departmental communications. He paused, looking directly at Judge Winters. And I should note that the handling of this case by the court is also part of our investigation. We've documented every instance where evidence was blocked, police testimony was given preference, and civilian witnesses were discredited without cause. Judge Winters' face reddened. Are you suggesting that this court has shown bias? I'm not suggesting anything, Your Honor. The transcripts speak for themselves. Linda Graham finally found her voice. Your Honor, the defense requests an immediate recess and moves to dismiss this entire proceeding in light of these extraordinary circumstances. Before Judge Winters could respond, the courtroom doors opened. 4 men and women in suits entered, each wearing visible FBI badges on their belts. One of them, a tall black woman, approached the bench. Your Honor, I'm Supervisory Special Agent Alicia Foster, FBI. We're here to support Agent Johnson's operation and to serve these federal subpoenas. She handed documents to the court clerk, then turned to face Officers Miller and Bennett. Officers, you'll need to surrender your badges and service weapons pending the outcome of this federal investigation. Captain Hayes stood up, his face contorted with anger. This is a setup, a political witch hunt. Marcus remained calm. No, Captain. This is accountability. Judge Winters looked at the papers the FBI agent had handed to the clerk, then back at Marcus. His expression had changed completely. Gone was the dismissive arrogance, replaced by something that looked very much like fear. This court will recess until further notice, he said, his voice barely audible. Without another word, he stood and hurried to his chambers. As Marcus left the witness stand, he caught Diane's eye. She gave him a small smile of victory. 6 months of careful work had finally paid off. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and community members when Marcus emerged. Camera flashes lit up the afternoon air as he stood beside Diane and Agent Foster. Marcus had removed his tie and looked more relaxed now that his true identity was public. Agent Johnson, how long has this investigation been going on? A reporter called out. The Department of Justice began looking into the Oakwood Police Department about 14 months ago, Marcus replied. I personally joined the investigation 6 months ago when we decided to take a more direct approach. Was getting arrested part of your plan? Another reporter asked. Our goal was to document the practices of certain officers firsthand, Marcus explained. We knew that as a black man driving in certain neighborhoods, I would eventually be stopped without cause. What we didn't anticipate was how quickly and aggressively Officers Miller and Bennett would escalate the situation. Agent Foster stepped forward. This is part of a broader federal effort to address systemic civil rights violations in police departments across the country. What we've seen in Oakwood, unfortunately, reflects patterns we've documented elsewhere. A reporter raised her hand. What happens to Judge Winters? Will he face consequences for his obvious bias? Diane answered this one. The Judicial Conduct Commission will review the court transcripts. Beyond that, we can't comment on potential actions against sitting judges. As the press conference continued, Marcus noticed Captain Hayes watching from a distance, his face a mask of barely controlled anger. Beside him stood the police chief and the mayor, deep in heated conversation. Later, that evening, Marcus finally returned home. Gloria met him at the door with a tight hug. I saw you on the news, she said. You were amazing. Marcus smiled tiredly. It's been a long day. They moved to the living room where Sam and Diane were waiting with a bottle of champagne. To justice, Diane said, raising her glass. It's not over yet, Marcus reminded them. This is just the beginning. But it's a good beginning, Sam said. I never thought I'd see Captain Hayes looking scared. Marcus took a small sip of champagne. The hardest part is still ahead. Documenting the violations is one thing. Creating lasting change is another. Gloria sat beside him on the couch. At least people are finally listening. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the Federal Building downtown. He had traded his suit for more casual attire, slacks, and a button-down shirt with no tie. The security guard nodded respectfully as Marcus showed his badge. In a large conference room, Marcus found Agent Foster reviewing documents with 3 other agents. The walls were covered with photos, timelines, and charts documenting the investigation. Good morning, Marcus, Foster said, looking up from her papers. Ready for Phase 2? More than ready, Marcus replied. Any word from the police department? The police chief called an emergency meeting with the union representatives, Foster said. They're in full damage control mode. The mayor has already issued a statement promising full cooperation with our investigation. One of the other agents, a younger man named Eric, handed Marcus a folder. The preliminary audit of arrest records shows clear racial disparities. Black drivers were 6 times more likely to be searched during traffic stops, even though contraband was found less often than with white drivers. Marcus nodded. Consistent with what we've seen in other departments. What about the body cam issues? That's where it gets interesting, said another agent, Maria. Their system logs show that cameras didn't malfunction randomly. They were manually deactivated, and the department's IT specialist helped cover it up. We'll want to interview him next, Marcus said. The door opened and a tall man in a Department of Justice suit entered. Marcus, good work yesterday, said Director Paul Roberts, extending his hand. Washington is very pleased with how this operation is progressing. "Thank you, sir," Marcus replied, shaking his hand. "But the real test will be what changes we can implement." "That's actually why I'm here," Robert said. "The Attorney General wants to use Oakwood as a model for our new accountability initiative. We're prepared to offer the city a consent decree that would mandate specific reforms." "And if they resist?" Marcus asked. "Then we take them to federal court and force the changes," Robert said simply. "Either way, this department will be transformed." Throughout the day, Marcus and the team conducted interviews with several officers from the Oakwood PD who had contacted the FBI, wanting to share information about misconduct they had witnessed. One young officer, clearly nervous, described how she had been told to target specific neighborhoods and how complaints were routinely buried. "I joined to help people," she said, her voice shaking. "Not to harass them because of where they live or what they look like." By late afternoon, news broke that Officers Miller and Bennett had been placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. Captain Hayes had announced his early retirement effective immediately. As Marcus was preparing to leave for the day, his phone rang. It was Diane. "You won't believe this," she said. "Judge Winters has recused himself from all cases involving the Oakwood Police Department. He's citing personal reasons, but we know the real story." "One down, many more to go," Marcus replied. "The community is organizing a town hall meeting tomorrow night," Diane continued. "They want you to speak." Marcus hesitated. "I'm not sure that's appropriate while the investigation is ongoing." "Not as an agent," Diane clarified. "As Marcus Johnson, the community leader you actually are. People need to hear from someone they trust that real change is possible." After hanging up, Marcus drove to the community center where he had been the night of his arrest. The same building that had hosted the charity fundraiser was now filled with people making signs for tomorrow's town hall. When he walked in, the room fell silent, then erupted in applause. Pete Williams approached him with a broad smile. "Man, you pulled off the greatest undercover operation I've ever seen. When you were in that cell with me, I had no idea." Marcus shook his hand. "That was the point, and your testimony helped make our case." An older woman Marcus recognized from church patted his arm. "We're so proud of you, showing those officers they can't just do whatever they want." Marcus addressed the room. "What happened to me happens to people in this community every day. The difference is I had the resources and position to fight back. Real justice means everyone gets treated with dignity, regardless of who they are." A young man raised his hand. "Will anything really change, though? We've heard promises before." "This time is different," Marcus assured him. "The federal government is watching now. But more importantly, we're watching. Change happens when communities stand up and demand it." As the evening continued, Marcus helped the group prepare for the town hall. They created lists of specific reforms to request, from better training to independent oversight of complaints. Marcus felt more at home here than he had in the federal building earlier. This was why he had joined the Justice Department in the first place, to be a bridge between his community and the systems that were supposed to serve them. Later that night, Marcus sat on his back porch with Gloria. The stars were bright above them as they enjoyed the peaceful evening. "What happens when this case is done?" Gloria asked. "Will they send you somewhere else?" Marcus took her hand. "I've requested to stay in Oakwood to oversee the implementation of the reforms. Director Roberts thinks it's a good idea to have someone local who understands the community." "So no more undercover work?" Marcus smiled. "No more pretending to be who I actually am." Gloria leaned her head on his shoulder. "I'm proud of you, not just for catching the bad cops, but for showing everyone that the system can work when good people hold it accountable." "That's the real victory," Marcus agreed. "Not just removing a few bad officers, but creating a system that works for everyone." In the weeks that followed, the investigation expanded. More officers came forward with information. The police chief resigned. The mayor announced a civilian oversight board with real power to review complaints. And in community meetings, across Oakwood, people who had never felt heard before stood up and shared their stories, knowing that finally someone was listening. Marcus attended every meeting he could, not as a federal agent, but as a neighbor who believed that justice wasn't just about punishing wrongdoing. It was about building something better. 6 months after the dramatic courtroom revelation, Marcus stood in the same courtroom where he had faced Judge Winters. But this time he was watching as the city signed a formal agreement with the Department of Justice, committing to specific reforms with measurable outcomes. As Marcus looked around the room, he saw many of the faces that had been there on that pivotal day: Diane and Sam, the reporters, community members. But now they weren't spectators to injustice. They were participants in the solution. Outside, the sun was shining on a new day in Oakwood. Change had come, not in a single dramatic moment, but in the patient, persistent work that followed. And Marcus Johnson, both federal agent and community leader, was ready for whatever came next.